From the campus of Yale University, this is Business Talk with Jim Campbell, nationally syndicated across the country on the Biz Talk Radio Network and coming to you from our flagship stations, Yale Radio WYBC and 1490 AM WGCH Greenwich. All talk and all business, 60 minutes of radio with leading figures from the world of business along with the business of politics and sports. Inside the doomed campaign of Hillary Clinton, one of the biggest upsets in presidential election history, from almost shattering the glass ceiling to shattered. Today on Business Talk with Jim Campbell, Jonathan Allen, head of content at Sidewire, columnist for The Roll Call. He was formerly the Washington bureau chief of Bloomberg News and the White House bureau chief for Politico. His co-author was Amy Parnes. She's the senior White House correspondent for The Hill. And their new book, which is generating a lot of buzz, Shattered, Inside Hillary Clinton's Doomed Campaign. Welcome, John. Thanks for calling in.
My pleasure.
How did you, first off, there's so much privacy paranoia attached to Hillary Clinton. How did you guys break through that?
I think it was helpful that we had written a previous book about her called HRC, about her time at the State Department and how she used it to set up to run for the presidency. So we had a pretty good set of relationships with people inside the campaign or inside her orbit already. We were able to expand on that some for this book, and we took some measures that we thought would be helpful in terms of getting people to talk to us. One of which was we promised people we wouldn't publish anything until after the election, so that what they were telling us, whether she won or lost, would not be would not affect the outcome, and we allowed them to speak on background, meaning that we could use what they said. We could even put quotation marks around what they said, but we couldn't identify the speaker of who said what, and that also allowed them to talk without fear of retribution.
At this point, they're probably, I assume, not too happy with the way the book came out. Let me ask you, there have been some critics that said that you guys have overplayed the infighting, et cetera. I had someone that worked for contact me saying that she's so genuine, warm behind the scenes. She sent me all these pictures of Hillary playing around with folks. And she wondered why the authentic Hillary never comes through. Do you have any insights on that?
Well, first of all, I think in this book there are a lot of scenes and a lot of moments where you do get a lot of the authentic Hillary Clinton, and I think that I think places this story humanizes, right? These are the stories that were told to us by the people that worked with her. Mm-hmm. They're not our stories; they're the sources' stories, and I think there was campaign infighting. There was a level of dysfunction. That doesn't mean that there weren't good moments on the campaign trail or that there weren't people on the campaign that got along.
All right, let me ask you this. We know that the server, the Russian hack, Benghazi problems, what Bill Clinton did, Huma, Weiner, Comey. There is a lot of stuff she had to fight, and you get this book, how besieged they are, and they're not allowed to have good days, et cetera. But I want to put it in this perspective. She got beat in 2008 by an unknown black guy who'd been in the Senate for 2 years with a scary-sounding name to a lot of people. She almost got beat by the only socialist in the Senate. Vice President Biden has the tragedy of his son dying that precludes him being in it. She then gets probably the worst qualified candidate ever to go against in Donald Trump. How did she manage to lose?
Well, I think that's the entirety of the book is the examination of that. But you certainly hit some of the bullet points there. Look, I think it's a candidate who ran for president without being able to succinctly express why to voters she was running. I think that was a big problem for her. I think that she did some things with the email server and the speeches to Wall Street banks that cemented a narrative that she was trying to hide something and not trustworthy, at least for a lot of voters. And ultimately somebody who overlearned some of the lessons of 2008 and 2016, some of which might have helped her. But this was, as you point out, she lost in 2008 in the primary, and she lost against a candidate that she would have picked if she could have picked the candidate to run against in Donald Trump.
Let me ask you this: the other way is maybe forces bigger than her. We have perhaps the best prepared candidate in history, as President Obama said, and an insider after all these 20, 30 years against the Brexit populism wave. Do you think that those forces might have been overwhelming, regardless of if she'd run a better campaign?
It's hard to see the campaign in terms different than those that we actually lived through them, right? I mean, if you change this variable or that variable, would something have been different? And obviously, with such a narrow victory by Trump in the Electoral College math, and particularly within the states, that he won that mattered in turning the electoral math. It's anything could have tipped the election. I do think that you had a candidate in Hillary Clinton who never really tried to distance herself from being an insider at a time of this these sort of great anti-establishment forces in both parties, certainly more so on the Republican side than the Democratic side. Whether she would have been able to do that effectively had she tried is another question, but she did not try. It's not like she came in with a big political reform agenda as part of her platform and said, "Look, if you elect me, here's what I will do to change how Washington works."
Good points. Let me ask you this: you get the sense that the server scandal, Benghazi, that she never really felt that those were real scandals and that they were, manufactured anti-Clinton. Bluntly, does she lie?
I think she says things that aren't true. Yes, I think there are times where she lies. I think that pretty much everyone who runs for public office lies at one time or another. I think what she tries to do is put something forward that has truth to it, or at least is defensible, or has she can argue something. She says things that aren't true.
Okay, let's look at another force, politics. Obama, you hear that he beat her by having better analytics, better ground game, all of that stuff. So she tried to learn that lesson, and you get the assumption then used a lot of analytics, but it didn't seem to work. She outspent Trump in some analysis 10-1. He didn't even run ads for whole chunks of the summer. Did that world change as well?
It really did. There's a debate that ran in this campaign, as Amy and I write in the book, that ran all along. Sort of a motif was this battle between the data analytics team, which basically concluded that it was a waste of time and money to try to persuade people who didn't agree with Hillary Clinton to vote for her. And it was much better to spend their time trying to find people who agreed with her and get them out to the polls. And so in a lot of ways they abandoned traditional persuasion efforts, which I think was, certainly there are people who believe that was a bad move. People internal to the campaign who thought it was a bad move. President Clinton really believed that she should be out there and that he should be out there trying to change minds instead of just turn out the base. But that was, it's again hard to run a different race, in an alternative universe and see what happens. But it's impossible to do that. But that was a huge debate internally. And look, she believed strongly that if she had, she ran a campaign more like Obama's in 2008, she would win in 2016. And that, what it does is that view of the world sort of discounts the importance of the difference between candidates.
Yes.
It could just be that Barack Obama beat her in 2008 because he was a better candidate.
The accountability issue now, you get a sense in the book that, she never really takes full responsibility. This very week, she spoke and said, yeah, I'm to blame, but then go back to 10/27 before Comey, and I would have won, and I would have won without Wiki, I would have won without Putin, misogyny. Do you think that, first off, you think she is the reason that she ultimately lost and that she has internalized that yet?
Yes, I think she's ultimately the reason she lost, and it sounded from what she said the other day that she hasn't really internalized that. It was an interesting sort of, I think she understood, obviously, that she had to acknowledge some responsibility. But then, if you listen to the bullet points of her argument,
yes,
it's largely that she was not responsible.
You're listening to Business Talk with Jim Campbell over the Biz Talk Radio Network, over 350 stations around the country. Go to biztalkradio.com. We'll look inside the dysfunctional Clinton campaign in the second segment. And we're back with John Allen. We're going to look inside the failed Hillary Clinton campaign, and I was really hit by the fact that no one was in charge. And you talk about the Mook Mafia, the State Department, the consultants, the communication silo, Bill Clinton. Then go through exactly how dysfunctional things were and how it was set up.
Well, it's interesting. There were sort of two leaders of this campaign from the outset. One was the campaign chairman, John Podesta. The other was the campaign manager, Robbie Mook. And just to give folks an idea, if they're not familiar with these people, John Podesta is a longtime Democratic hand, a former aide to Bill Clinton in the White House, former aide to Barack Obama in the White House. Goes back many years as a congressional staffer, sort of the Clintons' generation. And Mook was the younger guy, roughly late 30s, turning 40, and maybe not quite even, I'm sorry, he's a little younger than that, like late 30s, sort of a newer generation, really obsessed with data analytics and slicing and dicing the electorate to try to win. And they were the sort of two top people on the campaign, and they never really clicked, and in fact, they clashed a lot. Podesta had sort of an old school way of doing things. He thought Mook was passive aggressive because Mook would hide information from him, or hide's the wrong word, but wouldn't necessarily share all the information that was necessary to know what was going on in certain parts of the campaign with them. Podesta was, sort of in and out on issues. He wouldn't necessarily stick with something. He would float out and then he'd come back in. He was often sort of in Mook's face and we kind of cuss at him. It's sort of a different old school way of doing things. You had within the campaign this sort of silo of former State Department aides that were on the campaign, including Huma Abedin, who was closest to Hillary Clinton and acted as a gatekeeper. And a lot of folks thought she used that power to make decisions on things other than what was really her purview on the campaign. You had Jake Sullivan, who was originally the policy director on the campaign, who became de facto chief strategist. Sort of had just a lot of cooks in the kitchen. And when things were not working out, rather than go from that structure with the two guys who were really clashing the most, Mook and Podesta, rather than taking that and putting one person in charge, because so many people down the line from them weren't sure who was making decisions or who they should listen to. Instead of making one of them in charge, what Clinton did was she created sort of a board of directors within the campaign. This was one of the revelations from the book that was never reported during the campaign. She created this board of directors called the Super Six. And so instead of having one person in charge, it was basically there were six people in charge. I don't know that it got any more confusing after that, but it was sort of emblematic of a campaign that didn't have a real clear line of authority and decision-making structure.
It almost seems like management 101. And you also describe often instead of firing folks, they layered them, and all of which seems kind of crazy. Huma Abedin, isn't she, sort of a time bond? You've got Anthony Weiner hanging around. You got the conflicts that she was charged with, getting consulting fees while she was at State Department. What's the relationship with her and Hillary that keeps her in such a powerful position?
As we report, it's incredibly close personally. Huma Abedin's been described before by the Clintons as like a second daughter. So I think there's a tremendous personal bond between these two women, and you cannot overestimate how important that was to Hillary Clinton, who trusts Huma with all sorts of information, with all sorts of things that no one else is really entrusted with. And so, I think it was very difficult for Clinton to cut ties. For years and years, Huma Abedin's been, a potential liability for Clinton politically, and that never got in the way of Huma, sort of rising, or at least, at the very least, keeping her position and gaining power. And so, as we report toward the end of the campaign, as some of these things, these flare-ups with Anthony Weiner blew up, ultimately Abedin went off the campaign trail, but it took a long time, and I think there was some damage sustained by the campaign.
I thought it was very interesting, too, you're uncovering Jean Favreau was Obama's chief staff writer. Talk about his experience on, sort of writing by committee and no one kind of figuring out why the heck she was running.
Right. This is the opening chapter of the book. It's about her first big launch speech from Roosevelt Island in the East River in New York City, and basically her staff starts to put together a speech for her, and it turns out there are not only the people on the staff that are charged with writing this, and there's half a dozen or more of them that have a hand in it, but there's a sort of an outside pairing of Jon Favreau, the former chief speechwriter for President Obama, and Lissa Muscatine, who was Hillary Clinton's speechwriter at the White House, and also did some of her speechwriting at the State Department. And the original drafts of the speech weren't very good in the view of Favreau and Muscatine, and they sort of wrote their own version, and they sent that in, and nobody could really sign off on any of it. And lots of people wanted to throw things in, but nobody was able to really guide what was going on. And Favreau eventually sort of threw his hands up in the air and left the process, maybe a week or so before she gave the speech. As it turned out, it was sort of a smorgasbord of basic Democratic talking points, and Clinton goes out and gives a speech. It's not very electrifying. What occurred to or I don't know if it was all of them, but certainly what occurred to a lot of the people that were working on that speech is it wasn't really clear why she was running for president in 2016. What was her clear case for why she should be the next president, why voters should think that she was the one who had the plan to answer their needs, that she was not able to explain that. And as one of her senior aides said to me and Amy, I would have had a reason for running or I wouldn't have run.
Very interesting stuff. Let me ask you before we get to the end of this segment, did she ever realize that the look of taking money from Goldman Sachs and Wall Street and the foundation getting money from some bad dude type regimes at the same time that they were getting state access, at the same time Bill Clinton was getting personal speaking fees, did how badly that look not come across?
I think that she's certainly aware of it now. But for a lot of those things, it was too late for her to do a whole lot about it. I think that anyone who was looking at what the Clinton Foundation did, and I think, I'm definitely somebody who thinks the Clinton Foundation does a lot of good work.
Yes.
But if anybody was looking at all that was going on there, they would have warned her that there was a real problem for potential conflicts of interest. And we know that people warned her not to give speeches to banks at a time of rising populism, and her response was, if it's not this, it'll be something else that I get attacked on. And that seems so myopic in retrospect.
You'll see the Business Talk with Jim Campbell. We'll have Jonathan Allen take us through election night, the shattering of Hillary's dreams. We're talking with John Allen. The book is Shattered: Inside Hillary Clinton's Doomed Campaign. And Before we get to the Trump piece of it, I want to ask one on Bernie Sanders. I still don't, the sense of how she could have kept, not able to beat him so quickly. And did you guys find, was there, Debbie Wasserman Schultz, what was the degree that the fix was in there? And, I mean, could Hillary have won without superdelegates?
So, first, let me just disclose, I briefly worked for Debbie Wasserman Schultz in 2010 for a few weeks. Debbie Wasserman Schultz is somebody that was close to Hillary Clinton all along. She is somebody who worked for an institution in the Democratic National Committee in which the entire establishment of the Democratic Party expected Hillary Clinton to be the next nominee. Could Hillary Clinton have won without the superdelegates? I think the answer is yes. If you had no pool of superdelegates, Clinton still won the majority of the regular delegates, but the degree to which some of that was influenced by her having all those Democratic Party leaders behind her, it's hard to know for sure. Presumably it was helpful to her to have all that backing from within the Democratic Party, just in terms of signaling to voters what the party wanted to do. And I think, I think Bernie Sanders had a point, and one that he made pretty effectively, that Hillary Clinton was the candidate of the establishment, and that the establishment did what it could to support its candidate. And in some cases, there were decisions made by the DNC that were favorable to Clinton, and, he was frustrated by that, and a lot of his voters were frustrated by that. It's interesting. We kind of go through this in the book, but the campaign leadership of the Clinton campaign didn't like Debbie Wasserman Schultz either, and wanted her gone as chairman of the DNC, and ultimately did end up pushing her out after the DNC emails became public, and it was clear that there were some people within the party leadership that were saying bad things about Bernie Sanders.
All right, we'll move towards the Trump campaign piece of it now. The crooked Hillary, do you think that she did not know how to take him on? Should she have taken him on more frontally? I mean, calling him a con man if he's going to call her crooked Hillary, that kind of stuff?
Yeah, I think that, she sort of expressed this desire to do what Michelle Obama always says, which is that, they go low, we go high. Yeah. I'm not sure that was the right approach here. Maybe she should have gone low. Certainly going high did not help her, did not end up making her victorious. It's interesting, though, her entire, and by the way, I don't actually think she always went high. The entirety of her campaign was, toward the end, was to disqualify Donald Trump. And I think, she was effective at prosecuting that case to the point that 1/5 of his voters said in exit polls that they didn't believe he was fit for the presidency, and they voted for him anyway.
Yeah, that was
she might have done a better job to convince voters, to persuade voters that there was a good reason to vote for her.
Now, the running mate, really didn't express a lot of boldness. Do you think if she'd picked Elizabeth Warren, who to me strikes me as she could have taken Trump on frontally, would that have changed anything? And at the same point, you have a revelation in the book that they actually considered Biden, which is interesting. Talk about the vice presidential process.
So, a few weeks out from making her decision, Clinton looked around and basically said to aides that she didn't like her choices. She didn't like the short list of people around her. Bernie Sanders was never really under consideration. She looked at him as somebody who had done her damage during the primary, and obviously from the primary, she didn't hold him in particularly high regard in terms of his ideas on public policy or anything else. So she was looking at a short list of Tim Kaine and Cory Booker, the New Jersey senator, and Tom Vilsack, the agriculture secretary, who she likes a lot. And she just was had the feeling that none of them had any particular pizzazz. Biden had been brought up. There were some people on Capitol Hill pushing for that. Claire McCaskill of Missouri, the senator, was one that was trying to sort of get that into the bloodstream. And I think Biden was briefly discussed, but never really deeply seriously considered. ultimately, when Clinton was, sort of not satisfied with her short list, Elizabeth Warren started to make a move up the ranks of the list, and there was a much more serious consideration of her than I think was public at the time. And they went to, they had met together, and Warren went out on the campaign trail for Clinton, and ultimately the reason that we were told that it didn't work out is that Clinton didn't feel like she had enough of a background of transactions with Warren, enough to trust that if they were elected to the presidency and the vice presidency, that Warren would not grandstand if she disagreed with Clinton on something.
Let me ask you, would Biden have taken it?
I'm not aware of anybody ever being offered the vice presidency and turning it down.
Interesting. That would be what a historical. Let me ask you this. Now, Trump did, I guess, somewhat effective, at minimum, of conveying that Hillary was physically unable to perform. She wasn't well, blah, blah, blah. What are your thoughts on that?
I think, for years, Republicans were saying she was physically unfit for this job. If you go back, Karl Rove had said something about her suffering brain damage in a fall at her house. I mean, this was a sort of part and parcel of the Republican strategy all along to basically point out that she was older than most presidential nominees and get at the idea that she was infirm physically and maybe mentally. And then she played into it by running herself down, wearing herself out, and ultimately collapsing, as we saw on the anniversary of September 11th. So, I think there were some voters who were concerned about her ability to simply, do the physical and mental work of the presidency.
Do you have any doubt?
I think she would have been fine.
Okay.
And the reason that I say that is we saw her campaign, which is not easy for almost a couple of years there, the Benghazi hearings that she got through, sort of running circles around her interrogators from the Congressional Committee. I mean, the debates. We saw her perform at a high level over and over again. I don't know why she collapsed. I don't have, she says pneumonia. I'm not a doctor. I didn't examine her. I don't know, but there were certainly signs that she hadn't lost any mental acuity.
The second debate, Trump brings the women's Kathleen Willey, Juanita Broadwick, Paula Jones. I've had actually a chance to interview them, but how did that hit her and Bill Clinton, and was that a decisive event in any way, or just a complete gimmick?
It was mostly a gimmick, but it was an opportunity for Donald Trump to distract a little bit from his own issues, and also, to give the people who supported him a talking point, so that they could counter the allegations that Donald Trump would be the worst president for women, or he's misogynist or insensitive to women, or in the case of his own words, bragged about sexual assault. This gave people who supported Donald Trump something to counter with when they got hit with that, and obviously it was something that a lot of his supporters pointed to all along.
Now, the blue wall collapse. You described that she never visited Wisconsin, which seems almost like campaign malpractice. Talk a little bit about the blue wall collapse, and you saw some of the behind-the-scenes analytics. How did it happen?
So, I think number one, Donald Trump focused intently on those Midwest states that have been going for Democrats for 20 years or so. He focused intently on them, Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, in part, as he told one senior Democratic official, after the election, because he saw the hostility in the crowds out there. He felt there was an opportunity, and so he focused in on those states. I think Clinton assumed that they would be in her favor, and if they weren't, that she had bigger problems than just that. Trump went there over and over again. She never went to Wisconsin. She didn't go to Michigan again until she did a Grand Rapids visit within the last couple of days of the campaign. In Pennsylvania, she actually fought tooth and nail. She was there all the time. Her surrogates were there all the time. and she lost anyway. But these are states that any Democrat, even the ones that have lost, have won. Won those states in recent elections, and they were the turning point. They were the key to this election for Donald Trump, and his message was a lot better for working class white voters in Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin than hers was, ultimately.
And you're listening to Business Talk with Jim Campbell. In our final national segment, we'll have Jonathan Allen take us through election night, the shattering of Hillary's dreams. And we're back with John Allen. We're going to look inside the failed Hillary Clinton campaign, and I want you now to, as we get down towards the end, to take us through election night inside there. But before that, it was having this thing at the Javits Convention, which had a glass ceiling, so obviously the shattering glass ceiling symbolism. But I noticed, like the day before it was announced that those were canceled. Was that a sign that they knew something catastrophic was happening, or just coincidence?
No, they did not know something catastrophic was happening.
They did not know.
She thought she was going to win on election day, but she thought she was going to win.
Give us a sense of that night inside the her headquarters or her suite.
The book is really the first TikTok from inside the room at her suite in the Peninsula Hotel in Manhattan on election night. Where we sort of go through the hour by hour realization that she goes through, that she and her team go through. That she, at first they're going to lose Florida, and then the numbers that they're seeing in Florida are likely to sort of areas of Florida, the performance of certain parts of Florida are going to be replicated in North Carolina and some of these Midwest industrial states, and the sort of slow and shocking realization that she's going to lose the presidency. So we go behind the scenes there, and there's a really interesting set of things that happen around the time it becomes clear to the White House and to her campaign leadership that she's likely to lose. David Seamus, the White House political director, calls Robbie Mook, the campaign manager, and says to him, the president doesn't think it's a good idea to drag this out. Basically says he wants Clinton to concede, soon to Trump so that the peaceful transfer of power can happen, and so that nobody questions the legitimacy of the U.S. election. Mook says to Seamus, I'm not sure she's ready to go out and give a speech. Meanwhile, there's a fight going on, or a debate going on among Clinton's aides about whether or not they should wait to find out if there are other votes that might come in some of these swing states, or if it's possible automatic recounts will be triggered. A lot of them have lived through the 2004 Bush campaign where Gore had conceded and then sort of went back, and then there was that big court fight. So there was that debate was going on. Basically, Mook held off the White House for a little while, but President Obama wasn't having that. He called Clinton himself and said, you need to concede. Went over the sort of case for that. He obviously didn't think that she'd entirely gotten the message, because his next call was to John Podesta, who had just gone out to the Javits Center where her quote-unquote victory party was being held, and told everybody there that they were going to wait till the morning to see what happened. So Obama calls Podesta while Podesta is riding back to the Peninsula Hotel, and basically says to him what he had said to Clinton and what his aide had said to Mook, and, don't drag this out. We've got to have this transfer of power. It's important for the country. Somewhere in there, probably around the time the president's talking to Podesta, Clinton herself, comes to the place where she realizes she needs to concede. She cuts off the debate among her staff and says, give me the phone. I want to call him. She gets on the line with Trump and says those two words she thought she would never say. Congratulations, Donald. They talk for about a minute. He tells her she ran a tough campaign. She gets off the phone with him. She sits down with her staff to write her concession speech. To look at her concession speech for the first time. Somebody had written a draft of it earlier in the night. She had gone over the victory speech with her aides and perfected it, but had never looked at the concession version, which is one of the telltale signs that she believed she was going to win. So now, after having told Donald Trump congratulations, having conceded to him, she sits down at the table with her aides to go over the concession speech for the first time, and Huma Abedin comes to her with a phone and says it's the president, meaning Barack Obama, on the line. And Clinton visibly winces. She doesn't want to take this call. This isn't Obama telling him it's time to get out or to concede to Trump. It's him placing a consolation call from the president of the United States to the nominee of the party that just lost the presidential election. And she doesn't want to take the call, and she ultimately, obviously the president's on, she takes the call. And she realizes, in this moment that she's let herself down. She's let President Obama and his legacy down. She's somebody who really believes that he didn't get enough credit for his presidency, that he did a lot of really good things that he didn't get enough credit for. She believes that she's let him down. She believes she's let the Democratic Party down, and because of Donald Trump coming into the presidency, she believes that she's let the country down. And she takes the phone and she puts it to her ear, and she says, "Mr. President, I'm sorry."
Wow. Just a fascinating account of all that. The last thing I'd like you to do, because this was also interesting, I thought, and very heart-rendering, she had in her victory speech, she was going to end up talking with a line about her mother. Can you tell us about that?
Sure. About a week after the election, she went to go give a speech to the Children's Defense Fund, where she had worked as a young woman, basically doing work on behalf of children and young mothers. In that speech was a lot of what would have been in her victory speech. I mean, she made a lot of the same points that she'd been planning to make in a victory speech on the day after the election, but obviously she never gave the victory speech. So at the very end of that, she tells a story about her mother, Dorothy Rodham, who had been sent away from her parents with her little sister to go to live with grandparents that didn't really want them. And she had talked on the campaign about how frightening it must have been for her mother when she was, essentially a child, to be sent across the country to go live with family that wasn't really excited to have her, and how tough her life had been. And so she tells a story and she says she wishes she could take her mother, her young mother by the hand, when her mother was a kid, and say, it's going to be all right. Someday your daughter is going to grow up to be first lady and to be a senator and to earn 60+ million votes for the presidency. This is what she says at the end of her speech at the Children's Defense Fund. In the original victory speech, she said, I would like to go back and take my mother's hand and tell her, don't worry, it's hard to imagine, but your daughter is going to grow up to be first lady, senator, secretary of state, and president of the United States. That's how she had planned to end her victory speech, the one that she never gave.
And that'll send shivers up your spine. Really appreciate Jonathan Allen, a great job, head of content at Sidewire. The book with Amy Parnes is Shattered Inside Hillary Clinton's Doomed Campaign. As you heard, there's a lot of revelations in it, and a very fascinating read. This has been Business Talk with Jim Campbell. Next week on Biz Talk, Duff McDonald goes inside the Harvard Business School to uncover what he calls the moral failing of the institution. It's an indictment of the business school. Thanks to Jonathan Allen, and thanks to our national audience for listening. So everybody, next Sunday on Business Talk with Jim Campbell.